Voodoo doesn't have the best reputation, as it's usually seen as being very evil and weird, with its association with curses, zombies, guys in suits with paints on their faces, and weird ass dolls. But I'm here to tell you that the religion has been heavily bastardized. That's right, you heard me, Voodoo is actually a religion. So today I'm actually going to be talking about what Voodoo actually is, its origins, and how it garnered the infamous reputation that many know it today. The history of Voodoo actually originates from West Africa. Here it is known as Voodoo, meaning spirits, and it was practiced by the Asa, the Ewe, and the Fon peoples of what is now modern day Benin, Togo, Ghana, and Nigeria. Voodoo was one of those traditional African religions that believed in the harmony between man and nature. That the spirits and gods were everywhere. One of the major gods to worship was the supreme goddess Nanabulaku, who created all of the universe. In some cases, other people worship her daughter Mawu or Mahu, the goddess of the moon, and Lisa, the god of the sun, who is Mawu's brother/husband. Look, if Greek and Hindu mythology can get away with this, then so can the West Africans. Along the way, there's also ancestor worship and the various spirits called Lua, who serve as mediators and messengers between humanity and the gods. For Voodoo, everything is sacred because it is seen as an extension of the Almighty Creator. There are similarities with other West African religions such as the Orisha from the Yoruba religion of Nigeria, which is why some people will consider the Yoruba as practitioners of Voodoo but under a different name. Another factor are these objects called fetishes. No, not that one!
No. It's not at all what you think.
We're not talking about that kind of fetish, you sick freaks. Fetishes are items that were either carved from stone, clay, or even animal parts that were supposed to bring good luck and bring you closer with the spirits. So how do we get from this fetish to the fetish that most people tend to know? Well, that's a story that I will never tell. And unlike most religions, Voodoo is actually very matriarchal, with the high priestess being the head of services, as the line of high priestess is a group of successors in honor of the Queen Mother, who was the first priestess. Each priestess is chosen by an oracle and plays a key part in the community, such as organizing events such as weddings, baptisms, and funerals. And she would be the one in charge and organize the women while the men were either off to war or hunting for food, with her praying for their safe return. If I seem all over the place, it's because a lot of these tribal African religions and mythologies, and this can also apply to native peoples of the Americas as well, were from oral traditions rather than being written down. Because of this, a lot of these traditions and stories were lost due to slavery and colonialism. It's only been in recent years where these lost traditions were slowly being rediscovered. Speaking of which, I think this is a nice transition to everyone's favorite topic.
Slavery!
Oh, right. I am so embarrassed.
So as many of you know, during the Atlantic slave trade, various Europeans would forcibly take their Africans to the New World to be slaves. Here the Europeans will introduce the West Africans to Christianity. Now, despite popular belief, Christianity wasn't all that new to the West Africans, as it was brought over by Portuguese missionaries. And while some of the Africans did adopt Christianity, such as those in the Protestant British America, many of them were forced into it, especially among the Catholic majority countries such as Spain and France, who took them to the Caribbean and mainland Latin America. Which leads us to the island of Hispaniola, specifically Haiti, which was then called the French colony of Saint-Domingue. Here the slaves will have to hide their religions from the slave masters, either by practicing in secret or mixing it with Christianity. Believe it or not, despite what I told you about Voodoo, it actually had a lot of similarities with Catholicism, such as the Lua were venerated like the saints and angels. And while many look in horror at the animal sacrifices, for the Africans it was no different than the sacrifices of the lambs in the Bible. And Voodoo baptisms were very similar to that of Catholic baptisms. And thus, the female creator goddess Nanabuluku will become the male creator god Voodoo, or good god. Here the saints of the Lua will be made up of 21 different tribes or families, but the three main ones are the Rada, the Petwa, and the Gere. The Rada are seen as the more calm and compassionate spirits, mostly associated with the Catholic saints. Such is the case with Papa Legba, who is the messenger between humanity and the spirit world, and he is associated with Saint Peter, the main apostle of Jesus and the first pope of the Catholic Church. Damballa, the ocean spirit who created all the water on the earth, and she's associated with religious figures such as St. Patrick and Moses. And Urzuli, who many see as the version of the Blessed Mother Mary, with her being venerated by women and the LGBT community. Then you have the Petois, the more fiery and violent spirits. This is because most of the Petois are actually spirits of those who fought in the Haitian Revolution. And finally, we have the garnered, who are spirits that have the power over life and death, and probably the ones most people outside of Voodoo are familiar with. As you can see with Baron Samedi, who guides souls to the afterlife. Because of the top hat and the skull-like painted face, he is the poster boy for Voodoo for non-practitioners. But just because of how he looks and what he represents, he is usually portrayed as a villain outside of Voodoo. Such is the case as being the inspiration for Dr. Facilier in Disney's Princess and the Frog and being mistakenly called Papa Legba in American Horror Story. Honestly, I compare this to how Hades from Greek mythologies is used to portrayed in modern media. Because he looks creepy and is associated with death in the underworld, he's portrayed as a bad guy. But for the most part, he's just minding his own business, doing his own thing, and not really bothering anyone. And the same can be said for Baron Samedi. Sure, he drinks, smoke, and is very vulgar, but really, is that the most evil thing? I mean, we probably know one person in our lives who are like that. There's also a thing called spirit possession, where many people are possessed by the Lua. Now, many have accused us of being possessed by demons, but not really. If you've ever been to a black church or traditionally styled Baptist or evangelical service, you notice how people get into the music and festivities to the point that they end up going into a trance? With people claiming that the Holy Spirit was inside them, it's kind of like that. For many, possession is a way to keep in contact with the spirits and become a better person. And on Catholic holidays, many people will go on pilgrimages where the Haitian Revolution began to pay honor to those that came before them. And you may be asking, what about voodoo dolls? Are they actually the items that curse people? And the answer is no. In fact, the voodoo doll was one of the many things that was made up in order to tarnish the reputation of voodoo. It's possible that they were based off the aforementioned fetishes, but as I stated before, those were more good luck charms, and voodoo isn't really a religion that wishes ill will onto people. But what about zombies? Do they start off as the undead flesh eaters? Well, yes and no. The origin of the zombie is actually rather sad. So back during slavery, many of the slaves thought when they died, their souls were returned back to Africa. So because of that, many of the slaves actually committed suicide. So in order to stop this, it was stated that if the slaves killed themselves or angered the spirits, their souls would wander the earth while their body would still work without thinking. A personal hell for them. This belief eventually evolved into zombies being reanimated by shamans and priests called bakors or kapata for women, who would use the zombies for their own tasks. So did I ruin zombie lore for you? Good! So after everything I just showed you, how did voodoo get the reputation for being associated with witchcraft and evil? Well, if you guessed it, you know it was from everyone's favorite unwelcome guest,
Racism.
You see, voodoo really didn't capture the attention of the outside world until after the Haitian Revolution. Before the start of the revolution on August 22nd, 1791, voodoo inspired the slaves to rise up against the French slave masters. And while it took 13 years, the slaves took over the island and Haiti became the first successful slave revolution. For many whites in the Americas and Europe, this scared them as they believed that this would inspire their slaves to rise up as well. Voodoo would later spread throughout the Americas with various sects in Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and especially Louisiana, and going as south as Brazil and as north as to New York, with even some white people joining the religion. In fact, Marie Laveau, who was a woman of mixed Creole ancestry, was a prominent voodoo priestess in the United States. But the real spread of the myths about voodoo would not happen until 1915, when the United States invaded Haiti. I go into more details about this one in an early video talking about the US intervention in Latin America, which I recommend you don't watch because I'm not that proud of it. But under the American occupation of Haiti, the US troops would treat the Haitians poorly, and it didn't help that the soldiers would mistake the voodoo practices as witchcraft and devil worship, with human sacrifices constantly being rumored. With the word of journalist and writer William Seabrook, who, mind you, is a cannibal and drug addict, He would write this book called The Magic Island, which would portray the Haitians as subhumans who would practice these pagan-like rituals and were seen as a danger to the whites of all America, with media constantly placing voodoo as the source of all the problems. Even the Haitian government wasn't the best at portraying voodoo in a positive light either, as after the revolution, the Haitian government actually tried to ban voodoo mainly because they saw it as a threat to their own power. And around the 1960s, Haitian dictator Francois Papadac Duvalier would use voodoo to oppress the people of Haiti, with even a conspiracy saying he used voodoo magic to kill President John F. Kennedy. Welp, better add that one to the list.
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys!
Because there's even some blacks wanting nothing to do with voodoo, thus following the slander that was put upon it. No joke, during a bus ride I was on, this one prick said Haiti deserved all the pain and suffering it got because God punished them because they were devil worshippers.
What an asshole!
So is voodoo a bunch of witchcraft and devil worship? God no, in fact, it could be seen as another sect of Christianity just being mixed with traditional African mythology, created by slaves who wanted to keep their traditions alive in a hostile new land.